عملیات امشب با چند برابر بزرگی تکرار خواهد شد و تمام زیرساخت‌های اونها مورد اصابت قرار خواهد گرفت.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take you back to the 1960s when Iran, Israel and the United States joined hands to fight a common enemy, Iraq. They formed a trilateral intelligence alliance code named Trident. But today, the doors of diplomacy have been shut with the vows of vast destruction. Today, the world is at war. Watch these visuals of Iran raining hell and fury of 181 ballistic missiles on Israel. The much-famed Iron Dome, along with other anti-missile systems like David's Sling and Arrow, shielded Israel last night. United States naval destroyers joined in firing interceptors to shoot down inbound missiles from Iran. As tensions in the Middle East reach breaking point, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed that Iran will pay for the big mistake. However, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has warned of a stronger and more painful attack if Israel retaliates. Remember, these Iranian strikes came after Israel's airstrikes and artillery fire pounded southern Lebanon and began limited ground operations. As Israel eliminated the Hezbollah butcher Nasrallah, Iran's entry into war was imminent. Unfortunately, it's not just a local West Asia conflict between Israel, Iran, Gaza and Lebanon. The battle lines are drawn from America to Russia. Watch this graphical representation of who backs whom. The United States, UK, France, Japan, Germany, Australia have openly backed Israel, while Iran, Turkey, Lebanon, Gaza and Yemen are in the other camp. Strategic experts say a lot may depend on Russia and China if they come out to back Iran. India, of course, has always backed peace through dialogue and diplomacy. Watch how brinkmanship politics is pushing the world to the edge of a full-blown war.
At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel.
Bedeli her ne olursa olsun, Türkiye, İsrail'in karşısında durmaya, dünyayı da bu onurlu duruşa çağırmaya devam edecek.
We understand that Israel had a need to respond. But we also believe that any response by any country has to take into account international humanitarian law, that it must be careful about any damage or any implications for civilian populations.
And joining me on the legitimate question is the big question everyone in the world is asking. Is the world on the brink of World War III? That's the question and that's the debate coming up on the other side.
You're watching the News Hour at 9, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Joining me tonight, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, former Deputy Assistant to the President of the United States. Also joining me this evening is Yusuf Mohammed, regional political expert and commentator from Yemen. Dr. Hamid Reza Gholamnazdeh, Director of the House of Diplomacy, joining me live from Iran. Daniel Rubinstein, Israeli citizen, spokesperson and former member of the IDF spokesperson unit, joining me straight from Israel. And my first question to you, Daniel Rubinstein. What happened last night is a retaliation from Iran. The question on everybody's mind is when and how is Israel going to react?
I think a reaction is only a matter of time. We saw what happened in April when Iran fired ballistic missiles and sent suicide drones into Israel. And Israel's response to this was quite limited and measured in order to send a message to Iran that we can strike in Iran, but we are not seeking an escalation or a wider war. At this time in April, Iran didn't get the message that it's unacceptable to fire ballistic missiles in Israel. This time, I expect that Israel will need to respond in a much harsher way. Unfortunately, the international community has not brought enough pressure to bear on the regime in Iran to end its war against Israel and live in peace with all of its neighbors.
So let me ask you, Dr. Hamid Raza, who's the provocator at this point in time? 181 missiles being fired at Israel. Is this the best reactions that Iran could think of? And does this really mean that the situation now is reached a point of no return, and we're looking in the eye of a war not just restricted to Iran and Israel, but largely in the region, as well as many countries in the world taking position? Are we heading towards a world war kind situation?
We cannot discuss politics by slicing just a piece of time, and the situation in Gaza and Palestine is an 8-decade story, and what we are seeing there is an occupation that has happened for many years. So we cannot just look at now who is the provocator or what the situation is right now at this particular part of time. So we should to consider the whole history for the better understanding of the situation. But what I can see is that Iran retaliated the recent incidents and recent attacks by Israelis in order to stop the war machine that the Zionist regime is carrying out in the region. So yes, we did carry out ballistic missiles, and we are of course proud of that because we are actually supporting Palestinians who are under genocide of the Israeli regime in the region, and is being supported by Americans and some Western countries. You just had actually an infographic and listing the name of those countries who are supporting this situation. So what I can see is that Iran is trying to show restraint, but it needs to defend itself, and it needs to defend the security and stability in the region, which is threatened by the Israelis. And that is what they did last night, and they actually sent a message in April as well. But unfortunately, since the Israelis are in a situation of weakness, they are trying to do whatever they can in order to show some sort of strength and to show some, let's say, something that they want to have a show of power. So they are doing whatever they can in order to survive.
Dr. Hamid Reza, it's very well for Iran to say that it's protecting itself, but let me get in Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Was Iran last night just defending itself on the basis of historical occurrences, or do we go back to 7th of October, 8th of October and April this year before we get into the recent escalation that's taken place?
Why don't we go back to the fact that one of the two nations we're discussing says every single day, and especially on Fridays from the mosque, that they wish to destroy the other country. Israel just wants to live in peace. Iran wants to destroy the little Satan and the big Satan as well, America. Iran is a fascistic Islamic nation. It is a fundamentalist nation. It is fascistic, and the people of Persia need to liberate themselves. God bless Israel for helping to make that happen. The people of Persia will rise up and destroy the mullahocracy. Hezbollah is on the ropes. God willing, President Trump, if we do our part, will be back in the White House, and he will put that regime back on its knees.
Well, so let me get in Ambassador Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States. And Meera Shankar, nations will have to take positions the way the situation in West Asia and the Middle East is emerging. Iran, and Israel are there, but there are many other countries in between, from Lebanon, from Gaza to Palestine, to Yemen, Jordan, Russia, China, United States, European countries. Can we look at this situation as one side which is erring and the other side which is a victim, or how far back in history do we need to go, and what kind of a position will nations have to take, including nations like India?
Look, first of all, it's a fairly complex and divided history in the region. But let's just go back to October 7th, because the trigger for the current round of violence were the terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israel on October 7th. And there was a lot of sympathy for Israel and, of course, the belief that Israel had the right to defend itself. But I think the international community also believes that the response has to be proportionate. I mean, that it cannot really be wholesale attacks against civilian populations. And I think there Israel has been losing international sympathy, except from its close supporters, because 45,000 people have died in Gaza. There have been attacks on the West Bank, and probably another 80,000 have been wounded. And this is out of a population of about 3 million. And now we're seeing the war extend into Lebanon, Yemen, and Iran. Now, I think what is important right now, instead of looking at who did what to whom and we are going to retaliate, because I think these retaliatory passions, in a sense, have prevented cooler heads from prevailing in the Middle East. And even for Israel, its long-term security will really not be guaranteed by this kind of devastation in civilian populations around, because, new calls for vengeance will emerge. I think the long-term prosperity and stability of the Middle East will lie in halting in some way the ongoing conflict. There have been talks about a ceasefire. They haven't worked as yet. And then there's been talk about release of hostages and then extension of the ceasefire. And either Hamas or Israel have reneged or not accepted some of the conditions. So those discussions have not really progressed to a point where something tangible will emerge. And in the meanwhile, violence has continued with targeted assassinations and bombings by Israel, and now attacks, ballistic missile attacks into Israel by Iran. So it's a fairly dangerous situation. And the need of the hour is really diplomacy to try, to limit the chances of an all-out conflict in the region.
Well said. The need of the hour is to try a hand at diplomacy. But do you think, Daniel Rubinstein, there is space of discussing and talking about diplomacy at this stage, at a time when Mr. Katz, the foreign minister of Israel, has already stated that even the Secretary General of United Nations is persona non grata for Israel? So has restraint gone out of the window? Has diplomacy gone out of the window? Can Israel look at options that do not escalate the situation into an open war? What are the options in front of Israel?
I think there is always a place for diplomacy, and we should never rule out diplomacy. Right now, as we speak, Hamas, which was the government of the Gaza Strip that invaded Israel on October 7th, massacred 1,200 people and took hostages into Gaza. Right now, Hamas in Gaza is holding a baby, an Israeli baby, a little boy, and their mother. We have not seen them since October 7th. Where are they? We've seen no sign of life. We've heard nothing about them. Hamas has seized hostages, and Hamas at the same time is pledging to carry out more October 7th style massacres. The very next day, on October 8th, a group called Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is an Iranian proxy militia, Hezbollah in Lebanon, saw what Hamas did on October 7th and said, we like that. We're going to support Hamas. We're going to join this party. And from that time, on October 8th, Hezbollah has been firing rockets, guided anti-tank missiles, and suicide drones into Israel. The Houthis in Yemen decided that they're going to fire on international shipping in the Red Sea in support of Hamas in Gaza. So these groups saw what Hamas in Gaza did on October 7th. They know that Hamas is holding an Israeli baby that it seized from the family home. And who is behind all this? Who is supporting Hamas? Who is supporting Hezbollah? Who is supporting the Houthis? It's the regime in Iran. So I would like all the people of Iran to know, and they do know, that the government of Iran is taking their resources and spending them on faraway wars. There's no reason for war between Israel and Iran. Israel and Iran should be living at peace, like two member nations of the United Nations, but Iran has chosen in a way to be more Palestinian than the Palestinians themselves, who are seeking a peaceful arrangement with Israel. This is an issue of the Iranian regime seeking war. In diplomacy, you need some middle ground. Right now, on the one side is Israel, which wants to survive as a country. On the other side is the regime in Iran, which is saying Israel has no right to survive. So it's very hard to find middle ground at this time. It's been 1 year since the October 7th massacre. We're still waiting for the international community to do more to pressure the rogue regime in Iran to behave like a good member nation of the United Nations.
So, Dr. Hamid Raza, can Iran escape the responsibility on the charge of waging a proxy war against Israel by arming and funding both Hamas and Hezbollah?
We should first see what is the basis of our discussion here. If we look at the history, Iranians were against occupation in Palestine before the revolution. So it doesn't have anything particularly with the Islamic Republic. It is something that about humanity, and Iranians are against that. Or on the other side, we are seeing a former IDF member who is worried about an Israeli boy, and in a situation where tens of thousands of boys and girls and children and women are being killed by the same IDF forces. So I do not understand what the situation is. We are hearing that we need to adhere to international law and be a good member to the United Nations, whereas we have the UN Security Council issuing actually a statement and resolution against the Israelis, and we are seeing international courts condemning them. And we know that according to UN Charter, Iran was actually had all the rights to attack Israel in response to what happened in Tehran.
Clearly, if the battle lines are so sharply defined, there can't be middle ground as stated by Mr. Rubinstein. But Yusuf Mohammed, the question tonight is, can there be a de-escalation in the region, yes or no? Because that's what the world is looking at.
Number one is deleting photos manually. Well, we're hoping that there is a de-escalation in the entire region, but I don't think Israel wants de-escalation. I think the whole point of their military offensive, their military genocide that they are committing against the Palestinian people, and it is genocide, and this is according to the International Criminal Court, who has issued out a warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli Minister of Defense for crimes against humanity and war crimes being committed against the Palestinian people. So how could there be de-escalation when genocide is being committed? And it's nothing less than genocide when you have Prime Minister referring to the people of Palestine as the people of Amalek, and basically enabling and calling for genocide. And this is something that he has no problem promoting because the US and other Western countries have allowed them to continue to do so. So the way, Israel's policy is, let us commit genocide, let us wipe out the people of Palestine, and no one should stop us. Nobody should raise a single finger to try to stop us from doing what we are doing. And this just doesn't
Dr. Sebastian Gorka, is it as simple as that? Is the definition in this case of Iran being the victim or Yemen and Lebanon being the victims while Israel is the aggressor, is that Is that the only interpretation of this situation?
Well, if you're a moron or if you work for the jihadists, absolutely. Let's be very clear here, to all respect to the ambassador. There's nothing complicated or nuanced about this. Every conflict in the region, and even on the streets of Delhi or on the streets of, New York in 9/11 or Manchester or London, is explained by one thing. This is a civilizational war. Civilization versus the barbarians. It's very simple. Whether it's the Palestinian Authority, whether it's the mullahocracy in Tehran, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, whether it's the Houthis, they are the barbarians and they must be destroyed, and anyone who supports them must be destroyed. Everyone else just wants to live in peace. If the region, if the Arabs put down their weapons, there would be peace. If Israel put down her weapons, Israel would cease to exist. This is a civilizational war. Diplomacy is irrelevant when the other side is teaching their children to kill Jews, to kill Christians, to kill Hindus. This is civilizational war, nothing else.
Well, it is a civilizational war. It is an existential war. It is a war that is going to have large ramifications that will spread far and wide across not just the region, but across the world. We're looking at how and when Israel will retaliate, because that's the announcement made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but the world holding its breath and hoping that humanitarian crisis of the kind that this world does not need can be avoided at every single attempt that can be made to stop that. Well, we'll stop and end at that. Thank you very much to all my esteemed guests for joining me on the debate, and joining me on the other side is